friends! It's video time again. This week we are wrapping up the second half of my books that changed my life, changed how I look at the world, changed how I live my life video. This time it's the non-fiction books. There are only 3 books on this list and they're all productivity / self-help books that I have read in the last 3 to 4 years. 2 reasons for that. One, because I just did not read a lot of non-fiction books before I reached my 30s. And if I did, it was maybe a wee history book here or there. So there just aren't a lot of candidates for non-fiction books that changed how I look at the world. And the other reason is because I pretty much existed as the same person from the ages of about 18 to 28. Like, I grew and I experienced things and I grew older, but not a lot wiser, to be honest. I did gain a level of self-awareness. However, that almost made things worse because I was able to point out what I was doing wrong and identify the behaviours that were causing me problems, and yet was still completely incapable of doing anything about them. I'd always been terrified of turning 30. When I hit 25, I thought, right, well, it's all downhill from here. Until I got to maybe 6 months away from my 30th birthday, and it all kind of changed. I thought, you know what? My 20s have been kind of miserable. Like, not that good things didn't happen to me and that I was happy when they were happening, but my internal state was just one of general misery. Like, oh, she's got a new job, she likes the new job, but give it 6 months and we're going to make her hate that new job. So I told myself that my 30s were going to be much better than my 20s. But what I actually got for my 30th birthday was a global pandemic and solitary confinement in my own house. So it wasn't off to a very auspicious start. That being said, I do feel like the pandemic gave me a real kick up the arse to turn that statement that my 30s were going to be better than my 20s into a reality. Who knows what would have happened if we hadn't had a pandemic, if I hadn't realised that if I wanted a better life afterwards, I needed to put the work in. Enter my productivity and self-help addiction phase. I watched so many videos on YouTube. I read the books that they recommended. I downloaded their Notion templates. I did the journaling exercises. And honestly, some of them helped. I mean, self-help gets a bad rep and sometimes rightfully so, but I have to say that my life now is objectively better than it was before I entered that phase. And these 3 books that I'm about to talk about are a big part of that. Now, I am not saying that these books are necessarily life-changing for everyone. I think with fiction books, there's a bit more of an understanding that everyone's experience of them is different and is individual. However, when it comes to non-fiction, I think people see that more as, oh, non-fiction, well, non-fiction is fact, and fact should be the same for everyone, which is absolutely not the case. Different protocols and processes work for different people, different ideas connect differently with different people. So I am not saying that you are going to go and read these books and your life is going to be changed, but I got a lot out of them and I can say that they absolutely sent me in a new direction. The first being The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt. The premise of this book being that he takes ancient wisdom for both Eastern and Western traditions, things like do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and looks at whether modern psychology backs these up. This book gets a lot of hate for being pop psychology. I've seen people comparing it to Steven Pinker, saying that it's full of the same stuff that they've seen over and over again, that they've seen on TED Talks. But for me, a lot of it was new. A lot of the ideas in here aren't necessarily new ideas, you know, that people are hypocrites, that there's always 2 sides to a story. But there was something about this book that just put them to me in a way that made me think about them, like actually think about them. As with so many of these old ideas, we know them, but we don't really put them into practice. I've seen other people criticise it for being too shallow and not scientific enough, being too much of a self-help book and not pointing out that there are maybe contentions with some of the conclusions, that the studies weren't necessarily conclusive in a lot of cases. And those are all pretty valid critiques. Even myself, in the few years since I read this book for the first time, I have personally realised the difference between looking at factors that correlate with happiness and what actually causes happiness. The two can very easily be confused. For example, in here he talks a lot about having strong relationships, but that is something that correlates with happiness. Happy people tend to have a lot of strong relationships, but do those strong relationships cause their happiness? Can an individual not be equally happy with a few strong relationship or even one strong relationship? Does it have to be a wide range? So as I said, I'm not saying that this is a perfect book, that this is a groundbreaking book, but for me, it presented me with these ideas at a time when I was open and receptive to them, and in a way that really just made me think about my own behaviour and my own responsibility for my own happiness. I think one of the ideas that I took on board the most was just about how everyone is a hypocrite, including me, that everyone will spin a situation to their own advantage, that they will create the story that casts themselves in a good light, that we can always justify our own decisions and actions when we will hold other people to account for theirs, for things that they do against us. And it's such an old idea that there's two sides to every story, but it really got me thinking about that in a way that I just never have before. That, okay, yes, I might believe myself to be right in a disagreement, but just because I believe that, the other person has an equally strong belief that they are right. Now, obviously, in some cases, we can objectively say that this person is wrong, like most of us agree that murder is wrong. But when it comes to interpersonal relationships or even political disagreements, it's not that one side are right and one side are wrong. It's that there are different priorities on each side and different narratives and different ways of thinking about the world. So that's not to say that we need to change our beliefs, but we can be less antagonistic and open to the idea that the other side isn't wrong or evil. So maybe about a year before I read this book, I had a falling out with an immediate family member, and I was so angry and so hurt and just ready to never speak to this person again. But after reading this, I started to think about it, and was I still angry and hurt? Yes. Did I believe that I was wrong? No. But could I see how my actions played into their story, where their actions were justified and how what I had done had hurt them? Yes, I could see that. And I could realise that they were just as angry and hurt as me, and that if we went on in the same way, we might never speak to each other again. This book was the catalyst for me actually reaching out to that person and trying to contact them. Although it took me a while. It wasn't I just read the book and then I went and sent them a text. I had to get up my courage. But that was the impact that it had, just this shift of trying to understand other people's opinions a bit more. You've maybe heard me mention in my other recent videos that I am working on trying to be able to discuss with people topics that we don't agree on and that are very emotional for me. And that's just a natural progression of the process that started with this book. So yes, there are very valid criticisms of this book and it is not perfect, but it came to me at the perfect time and really helped me to shift how I view other people and their opinions. So one of my favourite sayings is hard work beats talent because talent doesn't work hard. And that's because it's from very personal experience. I've always considered myself a creative person, mostly because from a very young age I had a level of natural talent and enjoyment of primarily writing, but also drawing and to a lesser extent music. I also got a lot of praise and attention for these talents that I had never had to work for. And so I developed this idea that I shouldn't need to work on these talents, that I was naturally talented and that other people, lesser talented mortals, had to work, but not me. The reality is, though, that someone with a little bit of natural talent isn't going to outperform someone who's really worked at their craft. Pretty much anything is a skill to be learned, and that was a lesson that took a long time in coming for me. It led to a lot of frustration and misery, of wondering why I had this desire that I couldn't do anything with. I know it's not just me that finds the idea of putting in effort and creating things that are less than perfect, of putting in effort and still failing, as being completely terrifying. But I do think that my early experiences have sensitized me more to that, have made it a greater issue. It set my expectations of myself sky high. I would only ever be able to meet those if I was willing to put in a lot of work, which I wasn't. And I'd also become really dependent on the praise that I received for being good at things. So the idea of being not good at it in order to get better was just, no, we can't do that. So that was the place that I was in for the first 30 years of my life, until I just got so sick of my own bullshit. Just constantly dreaming about starting a YouTube channel or writing a book or getting into illustration and never doing it. Or maybe getting started in a great burst of motivation and then always dropping the project. It was like death by 1,000 cuts, 1,000 tiny disappointments. I had no trust in myself, no self-confidence that I would do anything that I set my mind to, that I told myself I was going to do. That's all a big introduction to lead up to the next book that changed how I look at the world, which is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Now, I read this in early 2022, which was when I made and posted my very first YouTube video. So at the time, I wanted to make self-care / productivity videos because that's what I was watching. This book was recommended to me by one of those videos, and it's basically a book about the creative process and Elizabeth Gilbert's ideas about that process. She is the author of Eat, Pray, Love, which I have never read, and to be honest, I have very little interest in reading. I don't know if her fiction would be entirely to my taste, just judging by the general voice in this, so maybe that's not fair to judge. I did mention this in my last video when I was talking about Seth Godin's The Practice and how I thought this book did that concept better. The message of the book is that you need to stop getting hung up on perfectionism, on results, on creativity's value being determined by how successful you can be or how much money you can make from it. That creativity is important and useful in and of itself, and that if you want to live creatively, and she includes all kinds of things in living creatively, but if you want to live creatively, then you need to commit to it, you need to show up, you need to do the work, and you can't be hanging around waiting for inspiration, waiting for your muse, or thinking that you need to drink yourself to death to make your best work. From this, I made the commitment that I was going to make and post a YouTube video. I did not say that it was going to be a good YouTube video, or even that it was going to be a watchable YouTube video, which is quite lucky because in the end it was completely unwatchable. I have unlisted it along with the other kind of productivity type videos that I did, just because when I decided to do BookTube, I didn't really want YouTube thinking that these were the types of videos that my channel was about. I wanted it to understand that this was a book channel. However, I may list the first one again. If I do, I will link in the card so that you can, I don't know, see how much my hair has grown since then, because honestly, you're not going to get much else out of it. The sound and the video became out of sync after about the first 30 seconds. I now know why. It was an issue with frame rate, filming on a smartphone. I had no idea at the time, and I was devastated because it took me 3 months to push through the resistance and the procrastination to script it and film it and learn how to edit it and then actually edit it. So yes, when it came out that way, after all of that time and effort, I was devastated. but I posted it anyway because I had promised myself that I would. And that was the beginning. That was that first barrier broken to me actually being on YouTube. So every video I have made since then, the reason that you are watching this video now is because of this book. But that's maybe not 100% true. Another book that deserves an honourable mention here is Austin Kleon's Show Your Work, which is on a similar line. It talks about how you shouldn't be practicing in secret and waiting until you get good to show people your work, that you should just put it out there and document the journey. It's a lot shorter and it didn't hit me as hard as Big Magic, but I did read it first, so I suppose maybe it was there laying the groundwork and then Big Magic did the heavy lifting. So again, I'm not saying that this is a perfect book that's magically going to change your life. There are bits of it that even I didn't gel with, like she has this kind of magical thinking about ideas, which just I can't with stuff like that. It's like when someone starts trying to tell me that the universe wants what's best for me, and I nearly sprain my eyeballs rolling them so hard. But despite that, it's actually a really practical book. You know, she talks about a short story that she was really attached to, and an editor said, could you cut it down? And instead of defending the integrity of the story, she said, absolutely, and she cut the story down. Now, I know that won't gel with some people's idea of creativity, some people that I have known in my life who really subscribe to that idea of the integrity of the work, and they won't change it for other people, and their image of themselves as the tortured artist. But after reading this and applying it, I think I definitely get better results with Elizabeth Gilbert's method. Really, between this and Atomic Habits is the reason that you're watching this video. And speaking of Atomic Habits, it is the third book on this list. I know I've talked about this before, kind of as a book, but maybe not so much about the impact that it had on me when I first read it. So I actually listened to the horrible machine voice pirated audiobook version on YouTube first because I was broke at the time, but it was late 2021. I was in the process of trying to break a pretty destructive habit that I had had for a lot of years that I won't really go into, but it was something that I did every day and I was dependent on, and it was really keeping me stuck in my mental and physical health. It therefore seemed like a very good time to be learning about habits, and is probably why this book had such a huge impact on me. I listened to the rubbishy audiobook version, and then when I got some money a few months later, I bought the book because it did just make me feel so motivated. When I read it, I felt like I could do it. I felt like I could change my whole life, which I suppose is what any self-help book is trying to do. It's trying to instigate that feeling of motivation. What most people, and myself included, struggle with is the persistence to continue and to actually make the change once that initial motivation wears off. I think particularly James Clear's own story of coming back from a horrific cranial injury in high school to play baseball again and win awards in university. The time that it took him to do that was obviously over a number of years, but when you're reading it, the time is condensed. It only takes a few pages, and so you're seeing these results happen in such a short space of time. It's like when I watch people do speed cleaning on YouTube and it's all sped up and you see the room become clean really quickly. It makes me feel super motivated to go and clean my own room. And just in general, it's a very enticing idea that you can get these huge changes from just making small adjustments to your life. So whether you love it or hate it, I got a lot out of this. There are a lot of techniques in there that you can apply to your own life. Some of them are not incredibly practical for your average person, like committing to giving your personal trainer $500 every time you don't hit your macros. I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, I'm gonna do that. But it definitely got me thinking about small changes that I could make in my own life. I got myself some timer switches. That was an idea lifted right from the book, that my lamp comes on in the morning when my alarm goes off so that the light's already on, I'm not in darkness. I also put one on the plug that my computer and my TV and my consoles go into, so that at night I would have to turn off. I don't use that one so much anymore because I'm actually in quite a good routine now. I don't really need it. I started putting my phone on the opposite side of the room at night so that when my alarm went off, I had to stand up to turn it off. And once I've stood up, 99% of the time, I'm not going back to sleep. I set up like 6 different bank accounts and now I have colour-coded bank cards and a bunch of standing orders so that my wages all go to different places and I'm just left with my spending money for that week. Now these things didn't magically change my life overnight and I have not been consistent with them over the last 3 years. I have absolutely went through slumps, some very long slumps, some like 6-month long slumps where I wasn't focusing on habits at all, but I have had that commitment of just when I have the energy, when I feel I can, coming back to it. And the periods of productivity and things going well have gotten longer and the slumps have gotten shorter. After a few years of focusing on habits and small changes and trying to make my life better, my life is objectively better. Now, you could argue that that is not because I read a book, it's because I had persistence and commitment and kept trying and kept working at it. And you would absolutely be right, but I don't know if I would have had the same persistence and commitment, if I would have had the same ideas, if I would be in the same place, if it wasn't for reading Atomic Habits. You can make your own judgment on that. Again, it might not be life-changing for you, but it definitely changed how I looked at the world. Now, there were other books that I thought about putting on this list, but when I really thought about it, did this book really have a long-lasting impact on how I view the world? Did it really change my life? There weren't really any others that I felt I could say yes. There is one other book that I thought about, and then I thought, given the subject matter, it wasn't really something that I wanted to talk about in a video. But I will give it an honourable mention, and it is Mind the Gap by Dr. Karen Gurney. This is a book about the orgasm gap between cis heterosexual men and women. It's about 30% when they engage in intercourse. You can maybe see why I didn't necessarily want to talk about it in a video, but be warned, if you have female genitalia and you read this, it may make you incredibly angry, like it did me. So that's a little bonus one. I have come through my productivity addiction now. I don't really watch a lot of productivity YouTube. I do read the odd book here and there, usually at the beginning of the year when I'm feeling motivated and maybe looking for some new ideas. But a lot of the time, what you don't really need are more ideas, what you need is more action. But I would be really interested if you have self-help productivity books that have changed your life, or if you have non-fiction books that are not self-help and productivity. I'd be even more interested to read those. So if you have them, leave me them in the comments. If you would like to subscribe and stick around and support the channel, please do. I would love to have you, and hopefully I will see you in the next video. Bye!